We're just going to bring you these live and exclusive pictures here from inside the presidential palace. What you are looking at right now is Taliban fighters inside the presidential palace. This is these pictures exclusive on Al Jazeera. We've been watching them for a few moments now, milling around the lush environs of the presidential palace. We're not sure if they're making an announcement yet, but the camera has been trailing those fighters as they make their way through the halls of the Afghan presidential palace, wandering up through the building, decked out in its finery. Of course, this after the Afghan president fled the capital. That's them taking their way through the marbled halls of the presidential palace, showing that's it's one of our Arabic colleagues who is basically showing, doing a quick show and tell around the presidential palace, where, of course, many Taliban fighters are accompanying him, with weapons slung over their arms. A very grand building, a building, of course, that played host to many dignitaries, and, of course, where the Afghan president was the one-time ruler of the lands. Now, I'm not entirely sure which desk they are sitting behind, but there it's almost like a family photo shot of the Taliban fighters sitting behind a very grand desk in the middle of the presidential palace. Let's bring in our correspondent in Kabul, Rob McBride. He's at the Al Jazeera bureau. When we get a translation, of course, we'll try and bring that up. But for now, Rob, we're just showing our viewers these fairly stunning exclusive pictures, I also have to add, from Al Jazeera, of Taliban fighters placing their guns on the desks, sitting behind the desk of, we assume that is the desk of the Afghan president. A fairly stunning turnaround of events in Kabul. You started the day certainly with the news that the Taliban fighters were surrounding the city. Now they're inside the presidential palace.
Absolutely. I mean, this has been a remarkable day of fast-changing events, and it continues into this Sunday evening. Yes, we saw earlier on this Sunday evening, in fact, still images of Taliban fighters inside the palace. Now we have moving images. We also have been seeing images of Taliban fighters outside the palace, posing for selfies with their fellow fighters, etc. So very much this has been a day that, yes, began with the encirclement, the siege of Kabul, pulling the noose tighter, if you like, around the city. The culmination, of course, of weeks of gains by the Taliban across Afghanistan, taking province after province, gradually forces falling back as provinces fell, and all of the focus, all of the attention, all of this great momentum that the Taliban built up, then being focused and directed towards Kabul itself. So this was the last remaining holdout of this government, as well as a couple of adjoining provinces and cities. But all the focus has been on Kabul. And then at the start of the day, we started to get reports that fighters were not only on the edge of the city, but were actually entering parts of the city, which really did raise the level of unease, the whole tension level. It was quite palpable. You could really feel that the presence of the Taliban was very close. And now we have had, despite an order earlier on Sunday that Taliban fighters should not go into the city, they should hold back, as we heard there, they should be restrained. There were reports of looting. We know that as soldiers withdrew, as some of the police officers we know actually simply got rid of their uniforms and put on civilian clothes. There were reports of various acts of looting around the city. We know that one university was broken into. So that seemed to coincide with this move by the Taliban to direct its fighters to actually go into the city, ostensibly to stop the looting. That's at least what they have said, to maintain law and order, countermanding, it seems, their earlier order to do so. So that's what we've seen. And in fact, on the streets, we have seen now where there used to be soldiers, where there used to be police, actual Taliban figures now taking over simple duties like directing traffic or stopping vehicles to do vehicle checks, to check who's inside, where those people are going, but very distinctly wearing the sort of the gab, the clothing of Taliban fighters. Just where we are here in Kabul, just behind me, this is the green zone. This is a heavily fortified area of Kabul. It's blast walls because it's around here that you have government offices and embassies and so on. Normally, you would have lots of army with Humvees mounting very big, very heavy machine guns. They all seem to have disappeared, and instead you have Taliban on the streets basically taking over those guard duties.
OK, Rob, as you're talking to us, we're continuing to show our viewers these live and exclusive pictures from inside the presidential palace. There are phones being passed between the fighters. We're still trying to get a translation for you, but just to get a sense of what's happening. But we are certain now, that's confirmed, the Taliban are inside the presidential palace in Kabul. Guns on the desks, certainly posing there, it seems, for a family photo, an announcement of some kind. It will certainly come as a great shock, Rob, to many in Afghanistan. Over the last few weeks, people have been reacting with surprise, certainly, to the speeds of the takeover. And this, it seems to be a complete takeover now, does it not? They're brandishing now a bullhorn in order to make some kind of announcement there. But this is certainly a takeover. We had been hearing from the Taliban earlier that they would not enter Kabul. They were wanting a peaceful transition of power. How peaceful is it on the streets of Kabul right now?
Good question. It changes by the hour here. It has been fairly, I can say, there's been a certain tension throughout the day. We've had reports, for example, the burst of gunfire that was reported through the US Embassy with that message that US citizens should take shelter. Now, apart from that message, we heard nothing more about that particular incident. That got everybody very excited for a while, but then we heard nothing more about that. Having said that, just in the last half hour or so, in fact, just about 25 minutes ago, we did hear a series of explosions, 3 explosions just over behind us towards the US Embassy. And just as we came on air, in fact, there was a 4th explosion, again, in roughly the same direction. And we have, at the moment, absolutely no idea what those explosions were. If it was coming from the direction of the embassy, we can only speculate that maybe it was something to do with the evacuation of the embassy, because that's been going on all day here. We know that parts of the embassy are being cleared out completely. We know that files have been destroyed. There have been fires in there to destroy files and so on. Or it may have been those explosions to do with somebody setting explosives from outside. We have been checking social media as much as we can. One of the problems here is that normally we would get police reports about these things, but of course, in many respects, we don't actually have a police force at the moment. I mean, the very good question here at the moment is who actually is in control of Kabul? With the Taliban ostensibly taking over and trying to establish law and order, it would seem that on the streets at least, they would be in charge. They are the people who are at the corners of the roundabouts, directing traffic, etc. But there's nobody actually for us to contact to say, what was that explosion? So we are sort of in the dark, so to speak. But there are troubling signs as we get into the nighttime hours here of Sunday into Monday morning. It is slightly uneasy. There are things happening that we don't quite know about, and we just have to feel our way as we go. But it is interesting that the changes that you have seen on the streets, that where we once had the army in their pillar boxes and with heavy machine guns guarding all of this area, which is this green zone, which has been traditionally over many years a real target for car bombers, for suicide bombers. All of those forces seem to have simply melted away, being replaced, as I said, by Taliban people on the streets doing those kind of duties. It's interesting also some of the other statements coming out of the Taliban this Sunday about the change in direction. With Ashraf Ghani gone, we had been talking about some sort of transitional government, some sort of change of power, that in theory Ashraf Ghani was talking with his close confidants about what kind of deal they could propose that would see a peaceful transition of power. Obviously, it would not include Mr. Ashraf Ghani being part of that. That was always accepted, I think, that he could never be a part of a new government. The Taliban would never accept that. But we had been expecting that there would be some sort of form of words that would go to the negotiators in Doha, that maybe they could ratify. That might lead to some sort of transitional government or a kind of a caretaker government that might then call, say, a lawyer jirga, one of these big gatherings of people being brought in from all over Afghanistan to discuss the shape and form of a new government. All that seems to have evaporated very quickly. We now are left wondering what exactly, what type of new government we're facing. And as far as some officials, Taliban officials are concerned, they are just talking about a straight handover of power. Why do they need to share power with anybody? There doesn't seem, in theory at least, anybody to share power with. So that it seems to be what they are talking in terms of now, is a straight handover of power. And this evening, at least, we do seem to be seeing that, in reality, a straight physical grabbing of power, if you like, with Taliban fighters wandering around the corridors of the presidential palace.
Indeed, it's very hard to talk about power sharing when we see the power being held specifically in the hands of those who are sitting in the presidential palace there. Rob, you've been on this story all day. You've been out on the streets. You've been talking to people. People have been clearly very, very anxious about the rapidly unfolding events that have been happening. Just as we're still trying to sort this translation for you and for our viewers here, but just give us a sense of what people in Afghanistan have been saying to you and the team as these events have been unfolding.
Yeah, there is a lot of unease here about the Taliban coming back and taking over. I mean, it varies from place to place. In the Pashtun stronghold of the south of Afghanistan, they have a different view, if you like, about the Taliban. They will view it very differently. In more cosmopolitan areas, such as here in Kabul, which has been transformed dramatically in the 20 years since the Taliban were last in power, they will have a very different view again. I mean, there have been, as Ashraf Ghani himself said in his speech just yesterday, I think it was, that there have been remarkable gains that have been made in the past 2 decades or so. And you do see that. It is a much more cosmopolitan place that has been transformed into. You've had all of these influences from abroad. People are far more international, have a far more worldly outlook. So there is an awful lot of worry, concern, fear in some cases about having a return of this regime, and you will meet people of a certain age who do not have very nice memories at all of when the Taliban was last in charge here, from the mid-90s until 2001. So there are concerns, and yet there is, when we've been talking to people in the last week or so, a gradual acceptance as they see the Taliban sweep up these different provinces and gradually work further towards Kabul itself. itself, an acceptance that the Taliban is coming back in some shape or form, and they have been talking to us saying, well, maybe it's okay, we could have some sort of joint government, some power-sharing government. And of course, in the last day or so, all of that has changed, as we just said. I mean, it's sharing with whom? It doesn't look like the Taliban does have to share with anyone.
Indeed,
but,
Rob, let me just...
very quickly, they do have to change.
Just to jump in there, we're getting more information out about these live pictures, which we're still broadcasting to our viewers. For those watching this on television, the chap in the suit, in the Western-style suits, we understand he is a palace official at the Afghan presidential palace. And he was saying that this essentially is them handing over power peacefully to the Taliban. So this is we see assorted Taliban fighters there. I'm assuming they're fighters because they're all brandishing rather large guns. But the palace official has just been speaking on Al Jazeera, saying that this is now the palace peacefully handing over power to the Taliban. So these are the images that we are showing our viewers now. Certainly, we're still scrambling to get that translation for you, but they're very dramatic scenes that we are showing you live from the presidential palace in Kabul. The palace where, of course, the former President Ashraf Ghani was... I beg your pardon, just a small correction there. This was a handover of the palace and not the power. So there's still some confusion this hour, but that palace official was handing over the palace to the Taliban, handing over the palace to the Taliban. So there's still some confusion about the balance of power, who is in charge of Afghanistan, but certainly with recent events unfolding the way they have, the chaos continues, but certainly very arresting images for you. That's Taliban fighters and officials speaking exclusively to Al Jazeera Arabic. We have had the palace official handing over the presidential palace to those Taliban fighters. Remember, of course, that I think I'm correct in believing that a few hours earlier we had a recorded statement from Ashraf Ghani, who was reassuring Afghan civilians that they would be safe and Kabul would not fall, presumably recorded inside the walls of that palace where we now have I'm being told we have translation. Let's listen in and hear what's being said inside the presidential palace in Kabul. So we're just
now that you have entered the city, are you going to revive the previous Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, or are you going to share power with the others as well? Our program is that the Commission for the Islamic Emirate, they have formed a political committee which is engaging with other committees. They are carrying out consultations and leading to good arrangement for the future of Afghanistan. Can you tell us when are your leaders coming to Afghanistan? Sheikh Abdul-Hakim Saqzai, Sheikh Mullah Hibatullah, are they going to come to Afghanistan or not? Mullah brother is heading the political commission. He's based in Qatar. He might come. I'm not fully aware as to when he's going to come. Amir al-Momini, Sheikh Hibatullah Akhundzadeh, is in Afghanistan. His deputies, Mullah Yaqub, Mullah Mahabas, they are also in Afghanistan. When the security is fully ensured, then they will also come.
Okay, they've just stopped talking for the moment. There's a bit of a delay in between, because we're working with several different languages here. There's a delay between the translations, but the gist of what we heard, they were asking about officials, Taliban officials, who of course have been negotiating in Doha in Qatar, asking where they are. Will they be coming back to Afghanistan? And the response there was that once the security is fully assured, then those Taliban officials who have been doing the negotiating over several weeks and months, they will be coming back to Afghanistan. I'm just waiting to get more of a sense from our translators as to what's happening. For viewers just joining us now, you're watching live pictures from inside the Afghan presidential palace in Kabul. Remarkable scenes, really. We had a handover earlier from a palace official who was in a Western suit and shorter hair. He was handing over the palace to the Taliban, who are speaking exclusively with Al Jazeera right now. We're just trying to sort out another translation for you. Let's just check back in with Rob McBride. He's live for us from Kabul, from the Bureau. Rob, these pictures are fairly astonishing, given the situation that you've been covering over the last several days in Afghanistan. Just talk us through what this means, the fact that the presidential palace is now the seat of the Taliban, it looks like.
I mean, it is pretty extraordinary. Well, one thing you have to say with the Taliban is their grip on media and social media. And we've seen this in the previous weeks as they have advanced steadily around the different provinces around Afghanistan. They have been very good, very quick at uploading clips and very deft at that, of the use of social media. And one of the things you see constantly, and you keep on getting mixed up of which provincial capital was which, the places they head for is the governor's residence. That's always seen as the seat of power in all of these provinces, and that's one of the images you look out for as an indication of, yes, okay, the Taliban will often exaggerate their claims of what they have achieved, but that is one of the telling indicators of when they have somebody with a large weapon sitting behind a grand desk in what was the former governor's office. So they're very good at that, and this is, I guess, this is their ace card. That we've seen all of the governor's offices. Now this seems to be the president's office. So again, they're very good at uploading these images, at promoting these images. It's worth pointing out, I mean, I think there are different faces of the Taliban, and I think the face of the Taliban that we're seeing here in Kabul is rather different to the face of the Taliban that we've seen in other parts of Afghanistan. You know, there are claims of war crimes, of atrocities that have been committed. There have been calls from various bodies, human rights organizations, to investigate actions by the Taliban in other parts, in maybe more remote provinces. I think we're going to see a different side to the Taliban here in Kabul, because they're very much, this is a very much a public, a world stage, if you like, and they want to show to Afghanistan, to the people here who are understandably very nervous about having the Taliban back, but also to the wider international community, that this is a different Taliban. This is a Taliban that has legitimacy, it can be trusted, it is responsible, and this is going to be a responsible government that can deal with its neighbors, can deal with powers like China, like Russia, and we've seen envoys from the Taliban go to those places that can be accepted by the international community.
OK, Rob McBride's there. Thank you very much indeed. We're back into the presidential palace. Let's listen in. We've got a microphone fitted now, and we have translation. Let's listen in.
Oppressing our people for 20 years. Thanks God. I was in Guantanamo for 8 years.
OK, just bring you a couple of lines while we're waiting for we're having some audio issues. We're waiting. Nothing's being said right now, so we're pausing the translation there. But we have heard from Qadi Salahuddin, a central security official of the Taliban, who said they're happy because there has been no bloodshed. The arrangement for the leadership of the Taliban to come to, they're arranging for the leadership of the Taliban to come to Afghanistan, finalising those security concerns to bring them back to Afghanistan, and also pointing out that the handing over of the government headquarters in several provinces around the country was done in a very peaceful manner, underlining that this transition that we're watching right now is also being done in a peaceful manner. So let's get some reaction to this now. We're joined now on We're going to stay on these pictures, but I'm joined now by Omar Samir. He's the former Afghan ambassador. He was also an advisor to the former to Abdullah, one of the senior officials of the Afghan government. He's speaking to us from Washington, D.C. It's good to have you with us here on the Al Jazeera News Hour. Just watching these pictures that we're broadcasting live from the presidential palace, what do you make of this?
Well, it's stunning. It's something that in some ways is historic. After 20 years, the Taliban are back, and as though they had not left, even though these were very long 20 years, a lot of bloodshed. 9/11 took place, and thereafter they were ousted, and there's been a war going on for 20 years. Billions and trillions of dollars were spent. Tens of thousands of people have died. So I think, obviously, it depends on your politics, but it's a bittersweet moment depending on who you are. We hope that for Afghanistan, it turns out to be an opportunity to get back into a normal and become a normal, peaceful country, a country that has seen 43 years of war and now needs some level of peace and stability. Now, whether the Taliban can bring this is doubtful. They would have to do it with the help of the Afghan people and all other political and social factions in the country. I don't think one single group can do that. They have to respect the will of the people in so many ways, and hopefully instead of becoming a sort of an opposition to the gains of the last 20 years, that they can build on that and help the Afghan people move towards a healing process.
We've just heard, well, the Afghan President Ashraf Ghani has just published a Facebook post saying that he left the country in order to avoid bloodshed. So we are hearing now from Ashraf Ghani, who at one time was sitting behind that desk in the presidential palace, now being occupied by several Taliban fighters. We're still on these exclusive pictures out of the presidential palace. Omar Samir, the Taliban, we've heard, have played a very savvy social media game. They've also been very keen to get the message across that they are respecting, they want to respect the rights of the Afghan people. They want to protect women, protect schools, basically showing a very different, a different face to what people might associate with the Taliban of 2001 and 2002 and so on. Are you reassured by these promises that the Taliban have been issuing over the last hours and days?
Well, the proof is in the pudding. So it really depends on their behavior and on their actions and ultimately their policies. It's one thing to make those pledges at this stage. It's another thing then to actually execute and implement those. I think it's going to be a big test for the Taliban to prove to the rest of the world and prove to the Afghan people that they have changed, that they are not the Taliban of the 1990s, that they mean well, that they actually care about the Afghan people, that they care about men and women and girls going to school, that they care about the youth that make up 80% of the country, that they care about the Afghan economy and security and stability and all of that. And we do know that the Taliban, for example, have a harsh justice system, but it has to be used judiciously and it has to be used within a certain framework that people can adhere to. And at the end of the day, I think they need to also respect some of the freedoms and liberties that Afghans deserve as Muslims as well as citizens of that country, like the freedom to express themselves, the freedom to move. So all of that is very important, and it's a big test for the Taliban. Yes, we've heard those narratives. We just need to see how it's going to translate into action.
So it's a test for the Taliban, but thinking of the people of Afghanistan right now, who may well be watching these images, they were assured they would be safe by Ashraf Ghani, who has now left the country. What next for the Afghan people, especially those women and girls who might worry that they might not be able to go back to school or go back to work?
See, the first test is to see if the Taliban are actually amenable to a political settlement that is inclusive and that is broad-based. If they are, then that is the beginning of a flexibility and compromise that they can show in other areas such as women's rights and girls going to school and to universities. They have come out in the past few days in different provinces of Afghanistan and also in Kabul saying girls can go to school and they can go to higher educational institutions. They can work, women can work. They have said it. But we now need that, as I said, to be translated into policy. But the first challenge is going to be how to create this transition, this interim period. Is it going to be a purely Taliban period, or is it going to be a broad-based power-sharing arrangement that others can also feel they are part of? And if the Taliban are smart and they have learned the lessons of history, I think that they're better served having a broad-based, inclusive system rather than the rigid Taliban system.
OK, Omar Samir, great to get your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Al Jazeera News Hour. Omar Samir, former Afghan ambassador and advisor to top official Abdullah. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's bring in our diplomatic editor, James Bays, now. He was reporting from Kabul until last week and joins us now from UN headquarters in New York. We'll talk about the UN in just a moment, James, but our viewers are still being shown these images from inside the presidential palace in Kabul. These are arresting images, are there not?
I mean, for someone like me who's been reporting from Afghanistan for 20 years now, I was there before the Taliban fell in 2001, before the American Special Forces arrived on the ground in Afghanistan, and just one reaction: wow. I mean, to see the Taliban, and these are actually fighting Taliban, they're not Taliban leadership, these are Taliban fighters, they're in the presidential palace, sitting in the president's desk, some of them lounging elsewhere in the office, in the armchairs where President Ghani used to meet other world leaders and dignitaries. These are amazing scenes. I'm told elsewhere in Kabul, elsewhere outside the presidential palace, they are now flying the Taliban flag. This has happened so fast. As you say, I was in Afghanistan just 8 days ago. I certainly wouldn't have left if I knew things were going to move this fast. And it is really quite amazing after the whole 20-year investment of the West in Afghanistan. Just the US alone spent $144 billion. That's from a US government report in Afghanistan, and for what? There'll be questions asked about the failures here. Forget about whether it was right or wrong to withdraw the US troops. The way it was done. Was there a massive intelligence failure? Did the US not predict the Taliban would move so fast? Was there a massive military failure? Because remember, the US military trained the Afghan forces. What did they not understand about that? I think it was the psychological blow of the announcement of the pullout, the fact the Afghan government had made no preparations for the pullout, the fact the US system with the Afghans, effectively the US military were the officers and the Afghans were the soldiers, and when the officers pulled out, the soldiers didn't know what to do. I also think the US was still looking at a map of Afghanistan that was made up of provinces and districts, and of course the Taliban were looking at a tribal map and speaking to all the key tribal players and getting them to change sides. And lastly, what a diplomatic failure. All those talks in Doha, the US strategy in those talks proved, I think, to be not the right strategy at all. They took the Taliban on trust that the Taliban, once they pulled out their forces, would negotiate with the Afghan government, that they come up with a unity government. I don't think that President Trump, who started those negotiations, or President Biden were perhaps following the words that we used to hear from Ronald Reagan, that Russian proverb he used to always cite: trust but verify. The diplomatic fallout will be felt far and wide. You had the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken on the American television earlier, claiming that they've accomplished absolutely everything they had to. This was not a failure of any shape or form. It'd be interesting to see if he stands by those remarks, given the scenes that we're broadcasting here on Al Jazeera. Just in terms of where the UN stands on this, James, we understand that the UN Security Council are likely to be meeting to discuss this. It looks like they're going to have an awful lot to talk about, isn't there? Absolutely. The situation is moving so fast. There was a call earlier on for a Security Council meeting. Some council members, I think, have been slightly dragging their feet because they really don't know what's going on, and they're trying to find more information of exactly what the situation is so that they can have a proper discussion of it. The latest information is the Security Council meet in just under 12 hours from now. That'll be an open meeting, so you can guarantee we'll be broadcasting it here on Al Jazeera. And I'm hearing that the representative of the UN UN in Kabul. Deborah Lyons will be briefing, but so will the UN Secretary General because of the gravity of the situation. The latest word on the ground from the UN is that they are not evacuating people at this stage. They are not doing any operations, though. All UN staff confined to their compound means no humanitarian work is going on. They are desperately worried about the security situation, as are many of these diplomatic missions, which are now scrambling to get their personnel out of Afghanistan. Remember, out of the 15 Security Council members, 6 of those countries were actually countries that had, at some point or other, soldiers in Afghanistan. And, of course, some of them, particularly the US and the UK, had very large numbers of soldiers in Afghanistan. We've seen pictures in the last couple of hours. The French ambassador already evacuated. There are reports that the US ambassador is also now left Kabul. We don't have that confirmed at this stage.
OK, certainly things are moving very, very fast indeed. James Baisdow, following events live from the United Nations in New York. Thank you very much. You never know, James, you may find yourself on a plane back to Afghanistan at this rate. But thank you very much indeed for bringing us that update from New York. Let's take you back to Kabul. Well, we're still showing our viewers those exclusive pictures from inside the presidential palace, where Al Jazeera has been live inside the palace, where Taliban fighters have been speaking to our colleagues on Al Jazeera Arabic. We have also heard from certainly a palace official who was handing over the palace, control of the palace, to those Taliban fighters. Rob McBride, you've been following developments in Afghanistan, well, in Kabul, really all day. The day started with the stunning footage of diplomats being airlifted out of the US embassy in Kabul. Seems reminiscent of those the last chopper out of Saigon. I'm just going to stop there. What we're showing you, our viewers now, Rob, is images of the Afghan flag being taken down. And that is Taliban fighters have taken down the flag of Afghanistan inside the presidential palace. That flag has been rolled up and has been placed on a mantelpiece. We're doing a little show and tell from one of our colleagues there. But that's the Afghan flag inside the presidential palace has come down. Staggering stuff, Rob. As I say, the day started with those fairly surprising images, and the day in Kabul appears to be ending with images of a similar shocking and surprising quality.
That's right. It is incredible that these two things are happening also, almost in tandem or parallel, if you like. We're getting everything that's happening inside the presidential palace, and not far away, we're still having the continuing helicopters coming in and out of the US embassy. As you mentioned, they have been continuing since the start of day. In fact, since last night, you could hear the helicopters starting to work, and that has continued throughout the day. And that seems to be going on oblivious to what's happening in the presidential palace. Obviously, the United States is not oblivious, but it's simply concentrating on this one task. It is getting people from the embassy or from the embassy compound over to Hamid Karzai International Airport, to the part of the airport which is largely cut off from the outside world, and the US would like to keep it that way, where it's putting
Rob,
people on planes and getting them out.
Rob, I'm going to cut you off there because we have now secured translation there. Let's listen in and hear what's going on inside the presidential palace.
12:15, when he's having lunch together with the officials. This is a piece of paper of the agenda of what is going to happen during Eid. Yes. Okay, this is sufficient for now.
So things are moving very fast, of course. Anyone following events throughout the day will have known that things have been moving very fast, very unpredictable. What we've just been watching is that's one of our colleagues from Al Jazeera Arabic who is inside the presidential palace with those Taliban fighters, basically doing a show and tell for our viewers in Arabic. So after that flag had been taken down, the flag of Afghanistan inside the Afghan presidential palace, we have been showing you some of the objects inside that room. We now have one of the fighters on the phone, clearly discussing those monumental events. This is the Taliban, of course, very many viewers just joining us, who are inside the presidential palace in Kabul. One of the officials of the palace has officially handed the palace over to those Taliban fighters. There's a lot of chaos and confusion going on right now, but certainly those fighters are taking our colleague and cameraman throughout the palace, heading down some stairs there. Rob, you're following these images for us as well. We're getting a tour, it would appear, of the Afghan presidential palace. Astonishing footage, really. A very grand building. We're getting the tour of inside the presidential palace. Of course, the Afghan president, Ashraf Ghani, no longer there, but he has managed to communicate via Facebook saying that he has he left Kabul, rather, to avoid the bloodshed. How do you think that message will be received by the people of Kabul and the people of Afghanistan who were assured by him?
Yeah, I mean, we're already getting some reaction to Ashraf Ghani's departure. I mean, we're getting, and it is not very complimentary. I mean, Dr. Abdullah, seen largely as his adversary in the Afghan government, he's said that that Ghani left people in a bad position. God will make him accountable, ultimately will judge him, it seems. We had the defense minister of Ghani's government saying that he tied the hands behind the back of the people and sold the homeland. That is not very complimentary. So we're already having some reaction to Ghani's departure. I just wanted to point to one thing that James Bay said earlier about the UN compound being locked down, UN people told to stay indoors. The UN, as we've reported quite a bit over the past week or so, is desperate to try to put into place various humanitarian programs and get out there and do its job, but it can only do that when it has a certain level of stability. Well, you know, that is now on this Taliban administration, whatever it looks like, because it seems as though they have, by hook or by crook, they have inherited power here. That is now on them to achieve. It's up to them to achieve stability. It's also, you know, they also now own this humanitarian problem, which arguably they have helped to contribute to. All the thousands of people who have been pouring into Kabul trying to escape fighting in other parts of the country. So that also comes with taking power. It's not just taking down the flag, it's putting up your own flag and then taking on the responsibilities that go along with that.
OK, Rob McBride there with us following that continuing coverage. Thank you very much indeed.